Hi, I'm Craig Phillips, Frenchic brand ambassador. This video is an A to Z on how to paint your room. I started off on bare plastered walls, applying 2 single coats. Then I did the skirting boards. Then we painted the door and frame both sides, showing you where you stop and start when using 2 different colours. Then we painted our wooden floors with the alfresco range. Then finally we painted various levels of Scallop effect across the back wall and around the corner. First off, I'm going to show you how to paint your walls and the woodwork. From protecting surfaces like your floors and woodwork, preparing new plasterwork ready for painting, skirting boards, doors and frames, to applying your first coat of paint on bare plaster, then once it's dry, the second coat, using a paintbrush, roller and a small handheld paint sprayer. Although these are brand new plastered walls, you don't want to paint directly on top of them without a little bit of preparation. I'm using a very light sandpaper, 150 grade, and I'm just gently scoring the surface of the plaster. Because if it's been plastered by a professional, quite often it's like a smooth glass finish and you want it to be a little bit more coarse for your wall chalk paint to bond into it. If you've got any holes in there, fill them with some filler, leave it to dry and sand them down. The corners where the walls meet, get your cork and run your gun all the way down from top to bottom. You can also do this along the edge of the skirting board where it meets the plasterwork. It's always wise to use a flexible paintable cork and not a silicone sealant. Once it's applied, you can smooth that off with a clean wet finger. As for the woodwork, mix up some sugar soap with warm water and give the surfaces a real good scrub down, washing off all the grime and grease. Give them a rinse, dry them off, then a gentle sanding if they've had some previous paint on before. This helps the new paint key to them. Now you can apply further paintable flexible cork around the edge of the frame where that meets the plasterwork. Now I've sanded the walls, I'm going to give them a light wiping down with a damp cloth to remove any dust off there. Previously painted walls may be greasy if they're in a kitchen or even grimy in a bathroom. Make sure you scrub all areas you intend to paint with Frenchic sugar soap. And finally, take your hoover and hoover along the top and bottom edges of your skirting board right round the room and around the door frame and any ledges that may stick out proud that could gather dust on. Now the walls and woodwork are prepared and ready to start painting. I'm going to start with the walls first, and the paint I'll be using is Frenchic's chalk wall paint and the colour is Sage Froth. Now I'm going to be applying it in 2 different manners. One is the traditional way, cutting in the corners and around the woodwork with the brush and then covering the walls with the roller. The second option is my handheld paint sprayer. There we go. Oh, look at that beautiful colour. This is one of the newest colours out of the Frenchic wall paint range. I'm going to give it a little stir up. Now with us painting directly onto bare walls, we've scored it a little bit with the light sandpaper. What I want to do is dilute the first coat down just a little bit, just 5 or 10% water. And that'll just help that first layer of paint penetrate into the plaster and grip onto it that bit better. Only has to be a small 5% of water in there. Mixed well, and this is the kind of consistency you're looking for. So pour some of that into my tray and start to roll my roller into the paint. I don't want to immerse it deep into it and let it fill up the insides of the cavity of the roller itself. I just want it on the edges. So once it's on the edges there, I rub it in and get plenty on there. So that's ready to start painting now. What I am going to do is take my brush and start to cut in right round the edges and along the skirting board and around the frame on this one wall. Now at this point, you don't have to worry about cutting the paintwork in on the plaster that neat up to the frame itself. I want to cover the plaster, of course, and then go over onto the frame, so I make sure that I cover all of my filler. I'll do this a couple of coats, and once it's dry, then I can cut in my frame, potentially with a different colour. Of course, if you're not painting your frames or skating boards, then you would have to mask along the edge and cut it in neatly. If you're worrying what this gap is, don't worry, our walls are hinged because they fold together in our studio. So now the cutting in is complete. I'm going to start with the roller, and what I don't want you to do is get a load of paint on your roller, start here in the corner, go up and down of this and start to move yourself across, because what will happen is you'll have a lot of paint on here and only a small amount of paint there. So I've got my roller loaded up. This is what I want you to do with it. One can go up, then across to here, and as you're putting that pressure, you're spreading that paint a little bit more equally. Okay, so it's nice and thick there. It's getting thinner as we go across. When it gets to that point, then you can start to cover that area in. You're putting a fair bit of pressure on there, not too hard so the paint starts to splatter back. But what we've done now is we've spread that paint a little bit more even than we would have done if we'd just started on one side and went across there. There wasn't that much paint on there because that was the first roll, so I'll add a little bit more in. And do the same again, just a little bit lower down here. And that way I'm spreading that paint around. Every time I use Frenchic Paint, it never ceases to amaze me. Even after just one single coat on brand new plaster, it looks like it's almost complete. Now I'm going to spray paint the walls. I did dilute my paint by 5% when using the roller on the bare plaster. However, I need it to be a little bit thinner, so I'm going to put another 5% in there to use it through the paint sprayer. Perfect, that's the consistency you want. And now I'm ready to spray paint the wall. Always test your mixed paint on a piece of cardboard when using a paint sprayer. You could adjust the nozzle for a narrow passover or a wide passover. You can also go up and down or left to right. Once you're happy with the finish, you're ready to start spraying your walls. If you are paint spraying, it's always wise to wear PPE. I'm using a dust mask and safety specs. Just hold the nozzle about 4 to 6 inches away from the surface, and I'm spraying from top to bottom for my first layer. Once I've done this, turn the nozzle, and then you can apply another layer going from left to right to make sure you've got a good solid finish for your first coat. And then of course you'd leave this to dry for 2 hours before applying your second. Whatever choice of application you choose to apply your paint, you know you're going to get a quality result when you're using Frenchic's chalk wall paint. For your second coat, no dilution is required, straight out of the can. Give it a good stir up, because as you know, it's lovely, thick, creamy paint. Straight into the tray, and using your brush, cutting around the edges. Using my brush, I'm going to cut in around the edges of the plasterwork where it meets the skirting board and the door frames. I don't have to be too neat at this point because Frenchic's chalk wall paint is also great for painting your woodwork. Now my walls are completely dry, I'm going to turn my attention to the woodwork. Now in this room, all we have is our skirting boards, door and frame. You at home may of course have windows as well. I would always recommend starting with the high points before you work your way down to the skirting boards. I prefer the doors and the frame because you can get a lot of traffic coming in and out, so you want these to be dry as quick as possible. So I've took my dust sheets up, I've given it a little hoover down, just to prepare the areas a little bit more cleaner and make sure there is no dust in the air before I start painting. As for the choice of paint, you've got a number of options. All Frenchic's chalk paints, of course, adhere well to woodwork. However, a lot of people choose to use their wall colours and continue them across all of the woodwork, which looks fantastic. Or alternatively, you can use the alfresco paint, which is suitable for indoors and outdoors, and of course is very hard wearing. And there is always the trim paint, which is perfect for skirting boards, doors and door frames, etc. And both of them don't need any finishing coat. I'm going to be using the alfresco, and the colour choice is Wise Old Sage, because I know it'll go great with my wall paint, which is Sage Froth. Now, I tend to paint the main face of the Architrave around the door frame first, and then I'll come in and cut them edges up in a moment. And I go nice and tight into the actual door itself. Of course, we are going to be painting the door, but I will have to open the door and get at the inner edge of the frame. Now, if you're confident with a brush, of course, you can just cut in around your hinges. However, if you're not, do mask them up to avoid any paint going on to the metal hinge. Now, cutting in these edges where the actual frame meets the plasterwork is quite tricky, so get a fair bit of paint on there and just start to go a little bit closer as you're going down the wall. Of course, if you're not confident on cutting these in with your paintbrush, you could always mask up along the edge of the plasterwork. Now, when you have cut in along that edge where it meets the plasterwork, you'll find some of the paint from your brush is going back onto the front of the frame. So just feather that out, because what you don't want to do is create what I call lumps and bumps on the edge of that external corner of the Architrave. And just feather over that nice and lightly. You're not putting any more on, not putting any more off. You're just spreading out what is kind of gathered on there from cutting in this edge. Now, in a 6-panel door like this, you have got quite a lot of detail, quite a lot of grain also that you can see in the door, and these kind of countersunk mitered edges on here. So these are quite bad drip hazards really. If you run your brush up here and catch it, you're going to get a drip coming down there. So once you apply the paint on, covering up the area, then you kind of press the brush in quite tightly and just start to feather it away from them corners all the time. That tight into that corner, and then up, tight into that corner and across. So I'm not brushing my brush this way and catching this lip, where of course it's going to pull any excessive paint off the edge of your brush. It's just about feathering it out, and always going with the grain where possible. Then you can do the same across the rest of the panels. I intend to paint all 6 sections before I complete the rest of the door. So now there's 6 recessed sections of the door are all painted and cut in around the edges. The next stage I would do now is these inner bars here and these center bits here. The grain is going that way on there and the grain is going that way. So again, I'm going to apply all the paint on and then feather it into the grain past this point, which is the joining point on there, and then I'll do my long strips at the end. One important thing to remember whenever you're painting is not to try and drag the paint out as far as you can and get it as thin as possible, you know. It's just about applying the right amount on to just cover that surface well. Of course, you don't want to apply it too thick, as the paint will run before it dries. And then when that strut across there, I cross it, I then feather it across that way. And you're just going to get the perfect finish then where the two bits of wood actually meet on there, or grain. So again, where I'm crossing the grain there, I went up that way onto this bar, and now I've gone across it there where that grain runs, and then these two side sections come all the way down there full length. If it was a solid wood door, not even a hard, soft wood door, this particular door is only a lightweight one, but the surface of it is compressed to give that wood effect. So when you paint the door, you still want to be able to see that grain in between there, and certainly not brush marks. It will dry flat, the alfresco range, so it's certainly great for beginners who haven't got a massive amount of experience painting. It just allows you to get a fantastic result when you're not a professional. When you're using it, you can see why millions of Frenchic customers say it's easy for beginners and it's the choice for professionals. So that is one coat now complete on one side of the door and the architrave going around the door. The next stage I'm going to do, whilst it's still wet, is open this door, paint the opening edge of the door, just the one opening edge of the door that's visible, and then the inner opening edge of the actual door frame itself, which of course goes right the way around. I'll do the two sides and the top head. Whilst the first coat of paint is drying on my door and frame, I'm going to apply the first coat to the skirting boards. Now, depending on how good you are with your paintbrush, you can, of course, use a low-tack masking tape and run a line across the top on your plasterwork, because that paint's dry, and also put your dust sheets back down and tape them up really tight against the bottom of the skirt itself. But of course, here in our workshop, I don't have to do that. I can go straight into painting. So I'm getting plenty of paint on my brush. I'm not going to start cutting the edges in here. I'm just going to get the paintbrush covered with the paint. And it doesn't matter if I touch the floor on this. I know I've hoovered up and I know I've brushed it all, so there is no dust on there to be gathered. Once you've got a bit of paint on your brushes, then you can start working your way closer to the cutting point where the edge of the woodwork meets the plaster. So again, like our frames, I'm getting plenty of paint on the end. I'm just bending it in, putting that little bit of pressure on and moving it closer and closer. Each time I strike the line in, I get that little bit closer. And I'm kind of pointing the brush quite high, or I'm holding it quite high and pointing it down towards that edge. And remember, it is only your first coat. It doesn't have to be perfectly neat. The main thing is to just apply the paint on as even as possible. And getting one good solid coat on. And again, once you've applied it on that top bit and you're causing the strain on the brush as you're dragging it and keeping it nice and tight, then as always you feather it off. Turned 50 last year, the eyesight's going. It's not a bad idea to have an old paintbrush to dust the areas down before painting, as dust can build up in these areas quite quickly. So the first coat has had 2 hours to dry. It's certainly touch dry and I can recoat it in normal conditions. So I'm going to apply my second coat in the same order as I did my first one. Just like the first coat, I covered the area first with my paintbrush and then pressed it in tight into the corners and drag it across one way. Same again on the opposite side, dragging it down making sure that I'm not catching the edge of the brush in that corner where it then could potentially drip. And as always, going with the grain where possible. A 750mm tin will provide a single coat for up to 12.5 square meters. For a durable finish, a minimum of 2 coats is required, so your 750mm tin should provide full coverage for just over 6 square meters on non-porous surfaces. Recently, the Good Housekeeping Institute has conducted an independent test on 22 brands of washable interior wall paint, and Frenchic has come out on top, being awarded Best Washable Paint and Best Chalk Paint. No primer or undercoat is required. It dries flat with an almost no sheen flat finish. Now when you're ready to apply your second coat of paint on your skirting boards, have a really good look at the cut-in line where you've delicately cut in along the edge of the skirting board to the plasterwork. If it's good and you're really pleased with it, great, keep at it with free hand for your second coat. However, if it's not perfect, you haven't got a professional result, here is a little trick. Get yourself some low impact masking tape, put yourself a line all the way across the plasterwork about 1 millimetre above your painted line. Once that's applied on, paint over this. Don't wait for it to dry, just remove your tape almost straight away and just look how perfect you can get this line. Now both the chalk wall paint and the alfresco range that I've been using are UKCA and EN713 certified, which means they're safe to use on children's toys. Frenchic's brand is all about the passion and the people. Their products are easy to use for beginners as well as the choice of professionals. Now the paint is dry on one side of the door, I'm going to paint the opposite side in a different colour, showing you where you stop and start with a change of colour. Now this side in the living room area, the door and frame is already beautifully finished with Frenchic's Wise Old Sage. However, in the hallway, I want this door painted a completely different colour. Likewise with the frame, but what we need to do is distinguish where we stop and start between two different colours. Like with all woodwork, before you start any form of preparation, give it a good clean down. Mix up some sugar soap with warm water, scrub all the surfaces, rinse it through and then dry it off. So let's focus on the frame first. As you can see, the entire frame is painted in the same colour, the Wise Old Sage, the living room side and the hallway side. But I'm going to start my different colour on the edge of this slam strip here, because when our door closes, it comes across past the architrave, halfway through the frame, and it hits this slam strip there to stop it going any further. So I'm going to keep the Wise Old Sage colour all the way through the frame on one section of the slam strip, which is here, and this line is where I'm going to start to paint my different colour. And to make it easier and quicker so I get a nice straight line, I'm going to apply some masking tape on that inner closing edge of the slam bead. The paint colour I'm using is Victory Lane, and again it's from the Alfresco range. It's suitable for indoors and outdoors. It's very durable, tough and hard wearing, which makes it the perfect choice for all your woodwork in and around your home and garden. I tend to cover the area first, then lightly feather the paint out. I do this straight away, not applying any more or any less paint on. This helps me spread the paint evenly and adds to a smoother finish. So getting the right amount of paint on is really important, and then just slowly feather it up and down, until you're happy with the first layer. Then you can remove your masking tape before the paint is dried, leave this for 2 hours under normal conditions, then it's ready for a second coat. Whilst the first coat of paint is drying on the outside frame, I'm going to turn my attention to the inside of the room. As you know, the door, the frame, the Architrave is all painted in the Wise Old Sage. That's had 2 coats, it's finished and it's beautiful. Likewise with this opening edge here as well. So we've got the Wise Old Sage on here and again on this opening edge. Now, the outside of the door, this is going to be my second colour, as well as this closing inner edge along here as well. So the one colour on here and the one colour on there, which of course is going to be Victory Lane. The Alfresco range of paint is self-priming, meaning no primer or undercoat is required. It's also self-sealing as well as self-leveling. It's EN 713 certified, meaning it's safe to use on children's toys. When painting these panels, I tend to apply the paint across here first and then start to squeeze it tight into my corners. Of course, these are recessed, they're quite deep, got mited little corners, and these are the vulnerable bits where you're going to get drips. So apply the paint on first, making sure you've got plenty then on your brush but it's not dripping, and then press the brush tight into the corners and drag it across. All the while you've got to be considerate, there's a little lip just on the end of here that you don't want to catch, and then press the edges of the brush tight into the corner and drag them down. And then once you've got all the paint on and it's looking good, you can feather over it really lightly with the brush, not putting any more paint on nor taking any more off. Now this particular door isn't a real wooden door, however it does have the grain effect on there to give it the impression. So when you're painting, make sure you follow the grain and paint across the bars, up and down, or left to right, following the nature and the shape of the door. Now I will be using my glasses because this is the important bit. I'm now coming to this last bar on the door and I want to cut it in to the different colour on this opening edge. So, like the frame, you can run a line of masking tape along the edge of there if you're not that confident on cutting in yourself with your brush, but I'm going to give it a go. So first I'm going to apply a fair amount of paint on that edge. Not quite up to the edge, I'm just working my way towards it as I'm brushing up and down, and then once I have got a fair bit on there, I can then bend the edge of my brush and just start to strike that line. So the key is not to overload your brush, just bend it, make it a little bit more rigid as you're coming across that edge. Keep feathering it as you do on the rest of the door. Now on the hinged edge of the door where it's bare wood, it's okay to go directly on there, with Alfresco paint being self-priming. I personally choose to go across the hinge. I know this isn't everybody's choice, but I think it looks okay. Now the paintwork I did to start with on the frame has now had its 2 hours, so it's dry enough for a second coat. I'm applying this the same as I did on the first coat, however, I'm not masking it up, I'm just cutting the edges in freehand. Now my first coat of paint has had 2 hours to dry. It's ready for its second coat. However, if this was a real wood door, a hardwood or a softwood door, do rub your hands all over it, because what you find is the first coat of paint tends to penetrate into the actual wood itself and draw the grain out a little bit, and it might feel a little bit rough. This particular one doesn't, because it's an artificial door, so it's still nice and smooth after the first coat, so I can paint now directly on top of that with my alfresco paint. If your door is real wood and it feels a little rough after the first coat, don't worry, give it a gentle sand down before applying the second coat. I'm going to apply the second coat on with my paintbrush using the same method as the first coat. Then once this is dried, it's complete. If you were applying your paint on with a small handheld paint sprayer, then the paint would require diluting by about 10%. Therefore, I'd apply 3 coats on with your paint sprayer. Now, I wasn't completely happy with the line that I cut in with the paintbrush on the front opening edge of my door. Therefore, I'm running a line of masking tape along there to apply the second coat. This way, I know I'm going to get a perfect sharp finish. So that's my version on how you paint one door and frame 2 different colours between rooms. However, the jury is out whether my version is preferred or not, because others choose to paint the outside colour all the way across the slam bead, which I did, and retain it just on that little edge here. So I decided to go to the outside edge. Some people choose to go to the inside edge. So I'm going to show you both versions. So the choice really is yours. This one or this one. This or this one. This or this one. Now, standing out here in the hallway with the door closed, all we can see is that beautiful Victory Lane right the way around the frame and across all of the door. None of the other colour from the other side. And when we look at it from the other side, of course the door is closed and all we can see is wise old sage right across the door, the frame and the architrave, which is exactly how we want it. Now I'm going to show you how you paint your bare wooden floorboards. Using Frenchic's Alfresco, weatherproof, inside, outside, chalk and mineral furniture paint. From cleaning and preparing new or old, hard or soft wooden floorboards, masking the skirting boards, cutting in around the edges with a paintbrush, applying the paint on with a roller and then feathering it out with a brush. Then the same again for the second coat. Now, preparation is the key to every successful job, because if you fail to prepare, prepare to fail. I'd certainly advise starting off by scrubbing all the surfaces down with some sugar soap. Mixed with hot water, really scrub off them surfaces. Once you've rinsed them through, dry them out. Then you can start your sanding. We recommend the same preparation on all projects. A good scrub with sugar soap, rinse and allow to dry. Then followed with a light hand sand, sufficient to abrade the surface. Vacuum away the dust and then you're ready to go. As with any project, prep is important. The surfaces should be in good condition, clean, dry and free from contamination. Any previous wax or oil-based protective treatment will need to be removed as part of the surface preparation. Now, if your skirting boards are a different kind or colour paint, you may need to mask up along the edge if you're not comfortable about cutting in. Lucky for me, I'm using the same paint, so I don't need to mask up the rest of the room. My flooring is untreated softwood, so for my first coat, I've diluted my paint down by 10%. You can either use alfresco or chalk wall paint for painting hard and softwood floors, concrete and most laminate floors. The alfresco is a flat finish. Chalk wall paint is an ultra matte. The paint is self-leveling and very durable on its own. For perfect coverage, a minimum of 2 coats are recommended at a rate stated on the tin. Now, I apply the paint onto the floorboards using a 4-inch roller. It's a little small radiator roller, a foam head on it, and for me, it's so much quicker and easier. And all I do is apply it on one of the planks, regardless how thick or wide it is, I'm going to take my large brush and feather across the paint I've just applied. And that way I've got a nice, even, smooth finish. Now, one thing to remember when you're painting a whole floor in a room is to make sure that you can get out of the room, of course. You don't want to paint yourself into a corner and then not be able to leave the room. For me, I've got a door here, of course, so I can leave that way. I'm almost ready to apply my second coat on the floor. I've left this to dry overnight. However, the minimum drying times is about 4 hours, but you must take your shoes off when working on the surface. I am going to give the surface a gentle little sand down with a P150 grade. The reason for this is because the first coat that I applied onto the bare wood, I diluted the paint down so it was a little bit thinner. It penetrates into that wood, anchors onto it, which is exactly what we want. However, it might leave the surface, certainly where the knots are, a little bit more coarse and a little bit rougher. So I tend to just get the light sandpaper and give it a little sanding down. Then I'll vacuum the floor, wipe it down, and it's ready for the second coat. I'm going to start on the same side of the room again and just paint one plank at a time with my roller and feather it out with the brush. This time for the second coat, it's not diluted. The paint is mixed up and straight out of the can. If your floor is expecting very high traffic, you can choose to apply 2 coats of either tough top coat, which gives you a matte finish, or finishing coat, which is a satin finish, as a layer of extra protection if desired. For the perfect coverage, a minimum of 2 coats are recommended at the rate stated on the tin. Once painted, do not walk on the area for 4 hours and then with socks for the next 7 days. Try to keep your pets off the area to avoid damage. Continue to treat the areas gently for the next 3 weeks until it's fully cured. We'd also advise you do not allow painted areas to become wet for at least a week. Frenchic Paints are self-priming, low odour, water-based, UK CA and EN 713 certified, so they're safe to use on children's toys. The paint can also be thinned slightly and applied sparingly using a dry brush technique for a fabulous beachy or distressed look. So that's my floor now complete after 2 solid coats. Now, of course, remember, if you're expecting a lot of heavy traffic on here, you can also apply a couple of coats of tough top coat or finishing coat for that extra protection. And finally, this is how you create multiple scallop layers across one wall and around a corner. I'm going to be using Frenchic's chalk wall paint. I'll apply that on with a paintbrush and a roller, but the other items you're going to require are a spirit level, a pencil, a plate and some masking tape, piece of cardboard, tape measure and some scissors. So the first thing you need to do is work out the height where you want your scallop effect. I'm going to set my height at 1000 millimeters, which is 1 meter from the floor. Once you've got your first line drawn in place, transfer that level all the way to the 2 corners of the room. Then you can continue the level line around the corner. Now I'm going to apply a line of masking tape across the wall, just about 1 millimeter above my pencil height, so when I paint the wall, it covers the line. I'm starting from one end right the way across the other with one single piece of masking tape. Now the masking tape is set 1 millimeter above my pencil line, I can use a damp cloth and wipe the line off the wall. The good thing is the existing wall has already had 2 coats of Frenchic's chalk paint, so it's scrubbable and no problem to wipe off any marks. Now my existing wall paint on the wall is Sage Froth, the colour of it. So my second colour that I'm applying to it is going to be a Seagull. Both of them are Frenchic's new range of chalk wall paints. And I'm going to apply it directly out of the can, just a quick stir up, straight into my tray and applying it with the roller. Now I'm cutting in with my paintbrush just below where the masking tape line is and the both corners. I'm not going to paint all the way down to the skirting boards just yet, as I've got another idea I'll let you know about in a minute. A great way to apply your paint evenly when using a roller is to spread it in a cross pattern shape covering close to a square metre, and then continue to cover the area in an up and down or side to side motion. This way it distributes the paint more evenly across the surface. Now I'm removing the masking tape. You've got a perfect straight, sharp, level line, which looks good as it is. Of course, you could leave it like that if this was the look you wanted. You can also use this method in the corner of a wall if the two different walls are being painted two different colours. You can also adopt it where the ceiling and the wall meet, if you want your ceiling a different colour than the wall. Whilst I'm waiting for my paint to dry, I'm going to prepare my plate to create the pattern. So this is just a plastic plate that I've got from our kitchen. It's probably about 350 millimeters wide. It's about 14 inches. And then I'm going to get some masking tape and I'm going to put a line right the way across the actual center of the plate. Now I'm just doing this by eye, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be about halfway. And why I want this like that is for I can place that now against the wall, making sure that either the top or bottom edge of the masking tape on both sides is perfectly level with my painted line on the wall. Then I can take my pencil and draw my scallop shapes. Now the paintwork behind me is dry. I'm ready to start drawing my patterns on the line. So your starting point is very important. You could start right over in the corner and start to draw your half circle all the way down, right the way across to this corner. But then if you get to this corner and you haven't got a full half circle in there, it might be a half, it might be a quarter. It's not going to look very symmetric if you're only painting the one wall on here. So what you would have to do is start in the very center and work your way out so you've got equal size cuts, let's call them, in the corner, and it'd be balanced out and symmetric on the eye. However, if you were continuing it around this corner, which is what I'm going to do, I could start with my full one all the way along, and when I get to here and I've only got a half or a quarter, I can then continue that half round onto this side here. But of course you don't have to cut your plate in half to be able to transfer that shape. I've got another little trick I'll show you later. Place your plate firmly against the wall, lining your masking tape up perfectly level with the painted line. Using your pencil, draw around the plate lightly. Then replace the plate next to your pencil mark and start the second scallop, making sure that your masking tape is still level with your painted line. Then repeat the process right across the wall. So now I've got to this corner and it's not a full plate width there, so I'm certainly not going to bend or snap my plate because Laura won't be very happy with that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this to draw a template onto a piece of cardboard. I'll cut that out with my scissors, and that way I can bend the cardboard around the corner and simply mark it with the pencil. Check to see if it fits. Then measure from your last scallop to the corner of your wall, transferring the size onto the cardboard cutout. Bend it tight into the wall and your scallop shape will continue around the corner. That's all my scallops drawn on. I can now start to paint these using Frenchic's oval paintbrush. This can be a little tricky if you haven't done them before, so get plenty of paint on your paintbrush and slowly start to paint along the underside of the line, moving it closer to the line with every stroke. Now you'd be forgiven if you thought I was using a different shade of paint, but don't worry, I'm still using the same colour, which is Seagull. However, the paint below my line has had a couple of hours to dry, and therefore it's closer to its final colour, as will the wet paint once this is dry. The large brush is a little tricky to continue my arch around the corner, therefore I'm using a smaller detail brush to try and create the scallop shape. For the Frenchic paints to perform to their full potential, you need to ensure you apply them effectively. One key factor is the rate of coverage. For example, a 750ml tin will provide a single coat of up to 12.5 square meters for a durable finish. Frenchic's brand is all about the passion and the people. Easy to use for beginners as well as the choice for professionals. It's environmental friendly with the official royal approval and went on to win a Queen's Award for Enterprise. Perfect. So that's my first coat applied. I'll leave this to dry for 2 hours and then apply a second coat. I've been in the construction industry for over 3 decades and I've used hundreds of different brands of paint over the years, and I can honestly say that Frenchic really is my first choice. You can see why millions of people all over the world are hashtagging it best paint in the world. Paints like a dream. I've now completed the second coat on there. Now remember I said I wasn't going to take this all the way down to the skirting board because I had a little idea. Well, my idea is to apply another layer on there, another layer of scallops, but with a different shade. So I started off on the above with the new Seagull, and I've got a Gentleman's Club here, which is a lot darker. So I'm just going to add about 50% of that into a small amount, give that a good mix up, and then do another line. As we did with our first line, find an appropriate height. Using a spirit level and a pencil, draw a straight line. Apply some masking tape above this, then cut in below the tape using your paintbrush. I'm applying a further section a little bit smaller, but I'm using a radiator roller. Again, I'm not going right down to the skirting board as I intend to do a third scallop line. One important thing to remember when mixing your colours, do be sure to mix the right amount to cover the area, because if you run out, it's virtually impossible to mix some more and get a perfect match. Laura and I have spent the last 3 years building our dream house, and we've had the pleasure of using Frenchic paints throughout almost every room of our home. From walls to ceilings to skirting boards to furniture, as well as our garden office. There really isn't much around our home or garden that hasn't been Frenchic'd. Now my second row of scallops have had their second coat and time to dry, I can start to mark for my third and final row. Like before, apply a further line of masking tape and paint below. But for this final row, I'll be painting all the way down to the floor, right across the skirting board. As Frenchic's chalk wall paint is durable and tough enough to be used on skirting boards and wooden floors. Then you can continue to mark up and paint your scallops just like I did earlier. Hopefully I've inspired you to paint your room. If you're looking for more how-to videos, subscribe to our YouTube channel, Frenchic TV. Or if you're looking for more inspiration yourself, head over to the Frenchic Fan Forum on Facebook. And if you want to know more about the products I've been using, visit the website, frenchicpaint.co.uk.